The Thayer is the last West Coast lumber schooner. I think the last of anything is significant. So many things we discard and then forget about. Now it's obsolete, we don't need it. Do you keep it? Do you let it go?
The Thayer was built by normal people and sailed by working people. It wasn't an object of glamour or beauty. It was one of thousands and thousands of things that carried stuff around.
One of the pictures that I love most of San Francisco is the whole bay is covered with ships, sailing ships. All you see are masts. I mean, you can count literally like 500 ships along the waterfront here. Maritime history is really what the history of the city began as. There wasn't a road to take in or a train to take in. Being up on a peninsula like it is, really the water was the only communication that people had from the outside world.
After the discovery of gold in 1848, California grew rapidly, and cities like San Francisco created huge demands for lumber. In the redwood forests of Northern California, along the shores of Humboldt Bay, a prolific shipbuilder named Hans Bendixen was producing dozens of schooners for the lumber trade.
Bendixen, all the other yards of the day, they built ship after ship after ship.
He would often have one vessel that was just getting the frames laid out, and right next to it was one vessel that was getting planks, and then another vessel that was getting rigged.
In 1895, the E.K. Wood Lumber Company ordered a 3-masted Bendixen schooner for their growing San Francisco business. Named for E.K. Wood's brother-in-law and business partner Clarence, the C.A. Thayer spent the next 17 years hauling lumber along the Pacific coast and abroad.
Her history of hauling lumber, where they would dramatically load her, get her to the point she was just, I wouldn't even say floating, probably wallowing would be the term. And then she would wallow back down the coast with her cargo.
On her maiden voyage, she carried Douglas fir over 5,000 miles to the Fiji Islands, and in the course of her career made 15 trans-Pacific voyages to Hawaii, the South Pacific, and Australia. Designed primarily for coastal work, the Thayer regularly sailed from mills in Washington to lumber yards in San Francisco and Southern California. By 1900, new technology was taking over the lumber industry, and sailing schooners were replaced by larger and more predictable steam schooners.
As steam power kind of took over the lumbering trade, one of the last uses of sail power in this country was the fishing industry up in Alaska.
The Thayer changed careers in 1912, sailing to Bristol Bay, Alaska every April for 13 years, returning to San Francisco filled with barrels of salted salmon. Sold to the Pacific Coast Codfish Company in 1925, she spent most of the next 25 summers voyaging to the Bering Sea, providing a floating platform for catching and salting codfish. The advent of refrigeration led to the decline of the saltfish industry, and by 1950, the C.A. Thayer was the last operating commercial schooner on the Pacific coast.
To be out on a sailing vessel like this is a beautiful sight when there's no vibration from an engine, no exhaust smell. There's the creaking and groaning of all the parts and riggings as the vessel rolls, but she just continually rolls very peacefully like this as she is sailing along. When we came home in 1950, we did not know that was going to be the last trip.
So codfishing industry really collapsed, and the few boats that were still left around, what do you do with them? Up in Richardson's Bay, there were all sorts of abandoned sailing vessels. I mean, Tiburon was an area where they used to burn old ships to get the metal parts out of them. In Thayer's case, an entrepreneur up in Washington bought her and exhibited her as a pirate ship laying in the mud, and that could easily have been the end. Carl Quartum was a chicken farmer from Petaluma, as he always liked to say, and loved ships. I guess he saw how sailing ships were just disappearing.
Starting with a collection of model ships and sailing artifacts, Quartum founded the San Francisco Maritime Museum in 1951. Purchased by the state of California, the C.A. Thayer was dragged off the mud of Hood Canal, Washington in 1957. A half-century of hard work had taken its toll, and the vessel was towed to a Seattle shipyard, where her rotten stern was repaired and new masts and rigging installed. Quartum and an intrepid crew of ship enthusiasts spent 2 weeks sailing her from Seattle to San Francisco, finally returning the C.A. Thayer to her home as the newest addition to the Maritime Museum. She spent the next 40 years as a floating exhibit, sharing her stories of the sea with thousands of visitors and school children. The vessel was transferred to the National Park Service in 1978, but by 2003, the Thayer was in dire need of repairs. She was hauled from the water to an Alameda warehouse, where she spent the next 4 years undergoing major repairs to her hull and deck.
It's one of those great projects that challenges a restorer or a preservationist or a shipwright. After we took the planking off to reframe, as we took off the external structure, the internal structure gave way.
The scale of a wooden vessel decaying, basically all of the frames in the middle of the vessel were gone.
It wasn't a production process, so everything was unique. We had to learn it each time. We had to figure out the process, and also we didn't do it straightforward. To frame a ship with the ship already there is backwards.
Every frame was carefully removed, reproduced, and reinstalled. So it required major work to get her back into a shape.
These ships did important things, and they left important information behind. And if you kind of use them as an inherent victim of entropy, something that's going to biodegrade no matter what, then you take a ship from being a stout, proud, fast vessel to a storage thing to a box of rubble. 6 years ago, her sister ship, almost an identical twin, the Wawona, was in Washington.
The second to last lumber schooner was also a Bendixson-built boat. Both Thayer and Wawona went through a slow, agonizing decay to the point where it's either replace a lot of it or it's going to be gone.
They loved that ship. That was their lumber schooner. But towards the end, the seaport that had her knew they couldn't care for her properly. And the repairs that had been done were plywood and tarps and all the things that tell you that the end is near. And ultimately, the ship was cut up. Through their good graces and our effort, we obtained several important pieces from the vessel that we have installed on the C.A. Thayer.
One of the pieces that we have from Wawona is the steering gear, the same size, same builder, literally a bolt-on replacement. The fact that it was another Bendixson-built boat and a really near sister ship, it's kind of like getting a kidney transplant from a family member. In many ways, Wawona lives on. Parts of her live on.
Returning to Alameda in 2015, the restoration of the C.A. Thayer continued. While out of the water, a new gammoning knee was carved and mounted, followed by the installation of the bowsprit. New chain plates were installed, deck rails were finished, and her hull was caulked and painted. Back in the water, 3 new masts were stepped through freshly cut holes and held in place with temporary rigging. Back in San Francisco, the final step is restoring the original rigging, taking advantage of the unique resources of San Francisco Maritime National Historical Park.
We have a lot of photographs of the ship. We have drawings by the designer of similar vessels. We fully utilized every aspect of this park in doing this rebuild, trying to match what was done in 1895. Everybody who has been involved with this has had to show a lot of responsibility for doing things the way they were done.
So we have the last one, a stock original model 1895 wooden lumber schooner. You know, if you can convince somebody to actually come down and stand next to it, a lot of people get it. The fact that there aren't a lot of hand-built wooden things that big hanging around, it's an unusual expression of great craft.